This is the first conversation in the Cocoa Beach Surf Museum's Talking Story series. And the purpose of these interviews is to explore the history of surfing on Florida's East Coast, and in particular, the world-famous breaks of Brevard County, from Sebastian Inlet up to Playa Linda Beach. The series was conceived by Matt Bellina, and the thanks go out to the people of the Surf Museum, to Bruce and Diane Reynolds, Surfinista Cafe, to Dr. Diana on the camera, and to the Brevard County Historical Commission. I'm Dan Ryder, and tonight I'll be talking with a man who has won 10 Easter Surfing Festival championships, 14 NKF titles, a Florida Men's Open title, and a dozen ESA district and regional championships.
Awesome.
He rode for the Hanson Competition Surf Team, was an original member of the Ron John Surf Team, and in 1969, a member of Dick Cattry's legendary Hobie team. He is a two-time over 40 winner of the NKF Longboard Championship, a Florida pioneer in surf reporting and surf forecasting, an inductee to the Space Coast Sports Hall of Fame, and there is an annual surfing scholarship that bears his name. He is well known to people in the know. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Freeman. Bob, in September 1966, you and some friends paddled out without leashes into 10 to 12 foot faces at Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. That evening, you were picked up by a Coast Guard ship 3 miles off of the Shackleford Banks, paddling alone toward the Cape Lookout Lighthouse.
Right.
A few days later, you moved to Cocoa Beach. Why?
Well, the move to Cocoa Beach had been planned months before, because I had an opportunity to go to school here, and at the time I had dreams of becoming an electronics technician, and I had an opportunity to work at the Space Center. And until that job opened up, I bussed tables at the old Mousetrap and bagged groceries at the old food fair across the street from the pier. But one of the plus sides of it was, because we had become interested in surfing a couple of years before, the attraction of the Space Center and Cocoa Beach was, of course, the surfing. And for all of us that were learning how to surf still on the Outer Banks, all of the surf magazines featured Cocoa Beach, Canaveral Pier, Canaveral Jetties, and Shark Pit. Sebastian Inlet had not been really discovered yet. And I thought, well, this is great. I can move someplace where I can go to school, begin my work career, and have a great place to surf and not have the cold winters and all that. So it was planned months ahead of time, and it was just a coincidence that I moved down here several days after Coast Guard picked me up in Hurricane Faith.
Okay. So 1966, it's fall, pretty much the heyday of the pier scene, the Canaveral Pier, which was used to be called the Canaveral Pier. Can you give us your first impressions of the pier?
I didn't have a car, and I lived in the Gateway Apartments in Cape Canaveral, which that proximity is kind of across from Cherry Down Park. Okay, so
not close.
Not
so
close. No. So I had a Hanson that I just bought from Tommy Morrow's shop, Atlantic Beach Surf Shop, a Hanson competitor, and I left before dawn and walked all the way over to that park, and then walked all the way to the pier, several miles, and arrived at the pier and buried my keys and a few bucks in the sand and paddled out and surfed at dawn with all the locals. And that was my first time surfing. And it was a small, typical Cocoa Beach, 2-foot day. But the lineup was already packed. Everybody was good surfers. And I was immediately in surf scene.
Now, is this the south side or the north side?
This was the south side.
South side. And who was in the water? Do you remember who was in the water that first day?
Yeah, the first notable, recognizable person I thought I saw was Gary Proper, but it wasn't Gary, it was his brother Jerry. And then I saw Gary later paddled out. The McRoberts brothers, who rode for O'Hare at the time, were all out, all of them, and Mom was sitting up on the pier watching them. Martin Coyview, who rode for O'Hare at the time, was out. Bunch of O'Hare guys, bunch of Oceanside guys, and a bunch of Surfboards Hawaii guys, and they were all in groups together.
Dog packs.
Yes, it was dog pack. So all of us riding old school surfboards of the era, the classic heavy flat longboard, no leashes, single fins. So many times when someone would lose their board, it would collect other boards on the way in, and then you'd have 4 or 5 people swimming in at one time. And of course the boards were built to last, and double lap rails, so they were pretty much ding free. But I just surfed all day and got into the scene, and really didn't have the opportunity to meet or make a lot of new friends until several months later.
I heard that that first time you went out, you helped someone's board who was coming in and paddled it back out to her. Had some words with her boyfriend.
Yeah, I mean, her board was washing in, and it was convenient for me to grab it, and I didn't know it belonged to a girl until I saw who was looking for it. So I walked it out and shoved it to her. She smiled and said thank you. She was real cute too. And next thing I know, I get a board whacked across the back of my head, and I turned around, and the guy is still around, and he's a good guy. I won't say who he is, but he looked at me and pretty well told me to stay away from his girl, and she had also asked for some wax, so I gave her a little bit of wax I had, and she used it all, and that was fine. Then I didn't have any wax, so I saw a guy finishing up a left and kicked out right beside me. He seemed like a nice guy. He was a good surfer, goofy foot. So I asked, do you have any wax by any chance? So he pulled out some wax and handed it to me. Then he looked me straight in the eye and he said, don't ever ask me again. And that was all within my first hours of surfing Cocoa Beach.
So,
Yeah.
so not exactly Shackleford Banks, but still a proving grounds is sort of when you
Yeah.
got here.
But it was all good, and
Yeah.
I had a great time, and the wave here was much softer, a much better longboard wave than what we're trying to learn how to surf off the Outer Banks. So I was having a great time, and it was warm, and I had a long walk back home, later, but I was happy to be here.
So for a while you were doing the walk and trying to get into the surf scene. Guys like Tommy McRoberts and Gary Proper and these guys that you I guess had seen before in the magazines or sort of knew
Yes.
who they were. What did it feel like once you started meeting these guys and talking to them? And what was it like out in the water?
It was competitive out in the water. If you can imagine, and some of you that surf the pier regularly and longboard at the pier know that on a good day it can be competitive for waves. But this was the spot to be. This is where everybody wanted to be. The pier was a wonderful hangout spot then. Looked a lot different then. And the wave broke in much further up on the beach. The beach was not as wide there as back then as it is now. So on a given day, there could be 50 longboarders out on the south side of the pier. And everyone paddling hard, and a lot of team guys. And
And a lot of guys who knew how to surf too, not just buoys floating in the water.
they all knew how to surf. They
Yeah.
all surfed great, and you had to paddle hard and try to get your own wave, and then you still have people drop in behind you and in front of you and all that. So that part took some adjusting to get used to, but as I got to know a few of the guys. Later on, I also, it was something I'd written about, I had returned to the pier, and there were a couple of boards washing in. It was one of those southeast days where the drift was going under the pier, and these boards kind of headed right to the pier, so I pushed my board off the side and grabbed these two boards, and One of them belonged to Kathy Jo Anderson, who's in the Hall of Fame, and another one to Paul Palmer, a friend of ours, a Merritt Island guy who's gone now. And pushed the boards back out to them, and so I kind of made friends, and then I kind of got to meet some of their friends. But I really wasn't accepted by everyone until they found out I was the guy that was rescued by the Coast Guard in the hurricane. And
So they heard the story,
yeah,
and then they found out later that you were the guy who.
they asked, yeah, mid-morning, late morning at a surf session on a decent day. There was certain places where people sat, and locals didn't sit there. And some of you have been around for a long time, may recall the sacred log that was at the foot of the pier and ran over to where that one lone palm tree is still standing. And the locals only sat on that log, and I was off hanging out on the side. And matter of fact, Tommy McRoberts, I believe, was he that reached over and says, "Aren't you from North Carolina?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, you know, who was that guy that got rescued?" You know, and I said, "Well, that was me." So I got invited over, and a guy named Ray Cobb gave me a beer, and then I had friends, and that evening they told me where all the local parties were, and at the time the Tropics were playing at the big old gym over in Cocoa underneath the water tower. And that was where everyone went on Friday nights. So Kenny Cohen's band, the Tropics, was playing. Yeah. So I went over there, and that was much like places that we had gone to on the Outer Banks, and there was everybody I'd surf with, and oh yeah, hey, how you doing? And so we just enjoyed the music and danced with everybody. It was a surf stop.
So you got into the scene. You got onto the Team Hansen. Hansen competitive team.
Yeah.
What did it mean to be a young surfer in the 60s in Cocoa Beach and to be on a surf team?
Wow, it was awesome. It was really awesome because it was different then than now. Now it seems like everybody is sponsored by somebody, you know, shoes, hats, surf shop, boards, you know. Back then there were only a few surf teams. And if you were asked to be on a surf team of one of the major board manufacturers at that time, it was a big deal. And I was surprised that I was asked to be on the team. And I said, sure. And so I filled out a couple of order forms for boards, and they gave me team jackets. I had a winter jacket and a summer jacket, and
the
t-shirts.
jackets were like big status symbols. Like if you walk around town with a team jacket, you were something.
Oh yeah,
Right.
I wore it everywhere.
Yeah, I would too.
And then when the rest of the Hansen team came from California, possibly for the Easter contest, then I got to hang with those guys, and that was Mike Doyle and Rusty Miller and Margot Godfrey, who was Margot Godfrey at the time, Margot Oberg, I believe now, and Cheer Critchlow. So I got to hang out with real surf stars, you know, and go free surf together, and we went up the coast together and all that. So they eventually made me captain of the East Coast team, and I was hanging in there in the contest then, you know. It was always a struggle to try to make it out of the quarterfinals and get into the semis or the finals. But I lucked out a couple of times, and it was a great time. I was still working full time and surfing when I can, so I didn't get to go on a lot of the surf trips and things that some of the other guys were able to.
What was your favorite board from that era that you surfed?
Well, my Hansen competitor, my 9.6 Hansen competitor, was probably the best longboard that I can remember riding. During that era, we had the shortboard revolution. So my first smaller board, as they were known then, was a mini longboard, was a 8.6 Hansen Doyle V-bottom pintail. And
this what year is this? About 69?
this is probably still around 60, late 67, 68,
Okay.
yeah. And then eventually went down to about the 7.6 range, still single fins and all. When Katrie later pulled me off the Hanson team with an offer too good to refuse, and I joined the Hobie team, I rode my favorite smaller board at that time was the Hobie Silver Bullet that I rode.
And then
got
what
to
size
travel
was
the
that?
team. That was a 7.2.
7.2. Who was on that team with you?
Well, Gary Proper, Dick Pollock, Joey Twombly. Tabling had already left Hobie to, I believe, go with Weber at that time with a real nice deal. Freddie Grosskreutz might still been on the team at that time. Several other guys I can't recall.
So you guys got your boards for free from the team, or did you have to buy the boards?
I paid costs for my first 2 boards from Hanson, and then after that, the boards were given to us.
What did a board cost in those days?
Under $200.
Wow. And these are handmade local shapes?
The Hanson surfboards were made in Encinitas. The Hobie boards were made in Dana Point. And the particular ones I had were shaped by the big name shapers at that time too. Here locally, the Oceanside team and the O'Hare team were the strong local teams.
Mary Ann Hayes was on the Oceanside team?
I believe she was,
Okay.
yeah. And of course, those boards were all made locally, you know.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the other places that you surfed in that time, in 66 to 69? I know there was another pier, and there were some other spots that I think would surprise some people that broke, that don't break today.
Well, of course, the other pier was Patrick Pier, and many of you remember Patrick Pier, or parts of it remaining and all that. But if you can imagine those days when you say, do I want to be at Cocoa Beach Pier or do I want to be surfing Patrick area because it's bigger, juicier. But there's a strong north wind and it'll be side shore down there and all that. But we had Patrick Pier to go to. And you go to Patrick Pier and the waves on the northeast swell would be 2 or 3 times bigger. But you had the pier that you could paddle out by, and the rights and lefts breaking off the pier, pretty much the same way it breaks there now. And the pier was on the very north end of the parking lot. At low tide, you can see some remains of the pilings. And then a storm tore up a good part of it just like a year later, and then they eventually took the rest of it down.
It'd be nice to have a pier down there now to surf.
It was great. Yeah, you had the real juice from the waves, but it was also my first experience with surfing over, at that time, quite a gnarly reef. And the water was clear, and you could see the reef under you everywhere. And
Coquina Reef?
Coquina Reef, but the reef was in such good shape with the good water quality that there was a lot of big mushroom coral heads and all that too. Yeah, and you could see some staghorns and things like that. So it was a living reef, a real nice reef. But
There's nothing like that around here anymore.
No.
No. Well, the dredging probably has something to do.
Yeah. What really changed things with our water clarity, especially in the Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach area, was they dug out more turn basins. It stirred up that bottom more and created more of that silt. And you know, those of you that surf the pier, you know, the water could be clear, but you kind of feel that silt on the bottom, and it gives it that murky brown look and all. But back in the 60s, you could see the bottom. If you wanted to fish, you could walk up on the pier and spot the sheep's head and just fish right on top of them and pick them up. So that has changed.
Yes, no question. What about, I read something about you surfing the Canaveral jetty, the north side. Is that correct, the north side of the jetty?
Attempted to once, but the guards ran us off. Where we used to surf, all of us, all the time, especially on the big southeast swells, was inside the jetty. And this is before they built the fishing pier extension on the jetty. So it was just the jetty straight out. And any of you that have ever had the privilege of surfing that peak at Sebastian Inlet, that would just rip off the jetty and just A-frame just rip down the beach. When Canaveral Jetties inside was working, which is actually the South Jetty, okay, there was multiple wedges coming off because the jetty was so long.
Oh, wow.
And on a head-high day, you could take off out at the end of the jetty, surf out to the channel, wrap back in, catch another A-frame, rebound off the jetty, surf it to the channel, come back and forth, then make that bend where the jetty turns. And then if you wanted that far of a walk back or paddle back, you could continue surfing right on down the inlet
Oh, wow.
to where the shrimp boats were starting to tie up.
And would this work on like a northeast swell, or?
A northeast swell would fill in there, but it would be windy,
Mhm.
and it was a great place to go on those very windy southeast days when it's
South.
just big and nasty and maybe overhead, and because you had all that protection there
I
inside the
see.
channel. And there could be 100 or more surfers in there.
Wow.
So we first started surfing it. We're still all riding longboards with no leashes, so you lost your board, it washed into the rocks.
Bob is one of the few people that I know, and actually the only person that I know, who's really had some experiences on the Canaveral shoals, surfing out there, taking a boat, and really, when you look at the map of Cape Canaveral, there is one point on that map, and that's out there at the shoals. Bob's been out there, and I want you to, if you can, talk a little bit about that.
Okay. I'd had some experience in North Carolina boating out to outer islands. A lot of islands you can sometimes see from a distance when you cross over from one island to the other on the ferries, like going to Hatteras. But in the area that I was at, there were several islands that were offshore that you could only get to by boat. And so I was comfortable with the idea, and one of the friends I had made, this was around October, I guess, of '66.
So a month after you came.
Yeah, pretty close,
You
yeah.
hadn't had enough of surfing out 3 miles out offshore. You needed more at this point.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
And there was a storm passing off the coast, but it was far enough out to be one of those days, Matt, where it would just send in that nice clean groundswell. The wind wasn't tearing it all up, but it was closing out everywhere, right? That big straight in groundswell at about 6-7 feet. So somebody mentioned the neighbor has a boat that his son borrows to go fishing. And the son didn't surf, but he would take us offshore, and we would see if any of the spots way out past the Cape were breaking. So I was into that. So we gathered some things, planned it the next morning, went out offshore, and there were people surfing inside the jetties.
Mhm.
And we picked up a friend on the way out. And you see all those little waves breaking right off the Cape, and those really aren't good surfable waves. It's kind of trashy, wish-washy. So we decided to just run out as far as we can until we reach what might be the last shoal. So it's known as the Southeast Shoal, and it's about 7 miles offshore.
Wow.
And that's where we wound up. And as I write about that, I told this guy, I said, don't anchor, don't turn off the engine. So we wanted to stay kind of close to the shipping channel, but out of the way of rogue sets. Because we really didn't, I don't remember if the tide was falling or rising or whatever. But I'm looking at waves that are just dream waves, 6 to 8 feet, 15-second interval, I guess. Coming out of 40, 60 feet of water, breaking on a shoal that was like a little island that was only about 6 to 8 feet deep, with deep water all around it.
Oh, wow.
So we jumped in and paddled over the break. I lost my board on the first wave, but it had no place to go. It winds up in deep water. I'd get on it, paddle back out. And then the set started getting bigger, and that's when I saw the boat get swamped by a wave. And I saw the bow get yanked down into a wave, and I realized he had anchored.
Oh, man.
And so, as the wave approached the boat, the bow gets yanked down, right, Tony? Into the wave. The wave just washes over the boat, blows out our cooler, our shirts, our T-shirts, everything. And I see a puff of smoke come from the engine, so we start paddling 50, 60 yards over to the boat, and that's when the hammerheads came out from under the boat. And they had been after, we didn't know till later, they had been after cobia. That those of you that fish, I guess cobia tend to shade seek the shade, and so there were cobia there under the boat, and 2 hammerheads came out as we started paddling to the boats. Now the hammerheads are coming to us, and we're paddling to the boat. So it'll, you know, encourage you to paddle a little faster. And, you know, we're 7 miles out. Where can you go? You know, so one guy got hurt trying to get up in the boat. He tried to jump up in the boat off the board, and he fell and hurt himself. And so now we're really afraid that, you know, you have that last moment when you only have a couple more steps to safety, and your body's still in the water, and you have that last moment there. But we all got back in the boat okay, and eventually got the motor started and found most of our stuff, and went back. And I made one other trip the next year out.
And were there sharks again, or?
Yeah.
So
there were lots of sharks.
Okay, so it's true what they say about the sharks.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of sharks, all kinds of bait in the water. Beautiful water, though. Kind of like the Caribbean. You know, it started getting that pretty aqua color and crystal clear. You know, the sand shoal was sparkling white. You could see it. But I only surfed it for about an hour with the guys, and I started getting a little spooked. I said, okay, it's time to go back. But I've been asked to go back since, and I don't want to go back. I feel like I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
Well, you know the spot. I mean, everyone's going to ask you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing, just real quick, I want to talk about some. Besides the surfing, you're very well known in the area as the Florida Today surf reporter for many years, and also your website with the surf report is one of the best websites. I go there every day.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit how you got started with the surf reporting. I know that you were working at the Ranjan on the pier, and you were broadcasting from there?
Yes. I landed the Cape job, but after we landed on the moon several times, I realized the contracts come to a close, right? And everyone started getting laid off. I didn't know what the word layoff meant. I thought this is what I do forever. So I got laid off with everyone else, had my knee operated on, took some disability, and Ron gave me a job in his store patching boards. But then he had the shop up on the pier, and after a while he asked me to go up and run that shop for him. And they started a promotion with WKKO radio to advertise Ron Johns on the radio. They wanted to tie that in with the surf report. So up at the surf shop, I could look right down at the main break over the counter, and it's kind of where the little gift shop is now, at the far end, and then you have the gap before the restaurant starts, and that's where the surf shop was. So I could give a live eyewitness report. So WKKO would call. We had a payphone in the shop to keep us from making long distance calls. And the payphone would ring, and I would answer the phone, and they would record me. They would not record, they would broadcast it live. And it became very interesting because as everyone found out I was doing this, the shop would fill up with rowdy people. Any of you know Mark Rhodes? Okay, and Barry Dix at the time, and Mark Crowell, and all those guys. They would all pile in there, and as soon as I'd get into the report, they'd just start yelling all kinds of stuff. Now, they were good guys, none of it was obscene, but it would be like, don't believe him, it's no good here, the pier sucks. No, it's flat, go home, you know, and it made the report a big deal. And the ratings went up, and it became a real interesting thing to do. And since I wrote that story, I've been contacted by the two guys at WKKO Radio, who were the disc jockeys who called in and did the report with me. And one of them was the one that gave Ron Johns the slogan, "Not one of many, one of a kind." And so they contacted me through that.
Oh, wow.
And we've exchanged some emails.
That's cool.
That's cool. It's very cool.
And from reporting, you got into forecasting, and you started studying the bottom contours and the depths and so on. Just real quickly, what can you tell us about how different the bottom contours are, the near shore profile today with versus how it was back in those days, and what what effects the dredging and the jetty extensions have had. Is it better? Was it better then, or is it better now? Or
It's similar. It's really similar. You know, right after the dredging, you're going to have some changes. You get a lot of soft sand that'll move around quickly. Overnight, the sand can position itself out into what was a trough. Next day, you know, there is a trough and all that. I hear a lot of people say that all the waves were so much better back then on all the beaches and all. I don't know. I don't think there's that much difference now. Mini breaks aren't the same as they were, but the pier is probably the one break that's different. Before all the sand was added, as we mentioned earlier, at high tide on a decent day, there was no beach left. You would finish up the rides right at the foot of the pier, and so where the extension sticks out on the right side, we called that the snack bar because of the snack bar that was then at that place. So a day that was waist to chest high, you would take off at the snack bar, and that's why it's known as the snack bar right, and that was a measurement. If the waves were breaking at the snack bar, that was a great day. For waves to break out the end of the pier, it had to be overhead.
oh wow,
So I would say the break at the pier has changed more than any of the others. But it does offer the wind protection. It does catch certain swells. It is a great place to go, an option for other places. So you can still have fun days there.
no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
So I think we can open up the, if anyone has some questions, we can maybe answer one or two questions before Bob leaves, and now's your chance. So, anyone?
So I understand, Bob, you've been heckled before. We refrained tonight, but you've been heckled before, huh?
Yes.
Oh, the question was, I got to repeat the question. The question was, have you been heckled before? It's from Tony Sasso. So you're not on the camera.
Yes, Tony, I have, and still am.
We had another one back there?
I think speak a little bit about how back in that era in the '60s, you know, the kids were so young back then. It was a lot different than it is now. You know, I know a lot of kids, you know, that surfed. It was rare to find somebody over like 20 years of age or so.
That's a good point.
The question, sorry, the question was, in the '60s, almost all the surfers were 20 and under, and so wanted to know like what you thought about the difference culturally.
It's a good question. It was different. There really weren't any people of my age group surfing. You know, it just hadn't been around long enough, even on the West Coast and especially on the East Coast. So the oldest persons that we surfed with were Pat O'Hare and Dick Cattry. So, you know, they were 10 years older than we were, so when I was 19, they were 29, and they were the senior guys. There really wasn't anyone older than that. But there also weren't that many little kids, the Groms, because we were all riding big, heavy longboards. And it was difficult for them to own one and get it to the beach, and it was difficult for them to get it out in the water. And there weren't that many girls surfing either, just 2 or 3 on the best days at the best spot. I think pretty much for the same reason. And that's really changed now. You know, the water's full of little Groms and Gromettes, and that's the future of the sport. But the change in surfboard design, I think, has made all that possible for them.
Yeah, Dan and Bob, the question about culture, you know, kind of talking about how many folks were surfing back then versus now, the age group, and what the culture was. It was pretty cool walking around with a surf team jacket amongst your friends and peers, but overall, I know back in those days, surfers were kind of considered outcast, problem child, you know, all that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Talk about the culture of the '60s, surf culture.
Sure. Yes, surfers, the image of surfers was from the Gidget movies, Moondoggie and all those guys, beach bums, living on the beach in a shack, no responsibility, don't care. That was the way we appeared to most everyone. I can't tell you how many times they tried to ban surfing at different popular beach breaks up and down the beach. And at the time, those candy cone poles were put up. There's an old picture of one by the pier. So you were not allowed to surf between the poles, and there could be several blocks difference between these candy striped telephone poles. You were not allowed to surf there. It just wasn't enforceable and all. But you had the surfers, you had the bikers, and you had the football players. And none of us got along.
The rah-rahs, right? They used to call it football players?
Yeah,
Rah-rahs?
some did, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was different. I mean, we all hung out together. We all liked what we did. But sometimes a bunch of bikers would come to the beach and pick on us, and there'd be a bit of a rumble in the parking lot. And then sometimes it'd be the football players that come over, and there'd be another rumble in the parking lot. And back then, Tony, when we had these little rumbles and the surfers kind of get into it and hit each other a few times, it stopped there. You'd grab your boards and look at each other, and you'd paddle back out and surf. You know, there was no vendettas. There was nothing that serious about it. But we were a different group, and actually we kind of liked it. And it was a real brotherhood. You know, we all felt like we were part of a unique group like we feel today. All of us here, there's something unique about the surfing family. I don't really like to surf crowds, but I like surfing with my friends. It's a social thing too. So that was very much in existence then. And this was also at the time that we were at the age of being drafted for Vietnam. You know, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were coming out. Everything was changing. And we were outcast and misunderstood. And when we first started surfing Sebastian Inlet, we weren't even allowed to pull up in the parking lot until Dick Cattree and Mike Tabling, through a lot of lobbying and diligence, finally got that changed. We weren't that well thought of, you know. But that over time, I think, has softened.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Bob. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for illuminating this particular time frame, which I think a lot of people do consider the glory days of the Cocoa Beach Pier, especially. And I want to thank everyone for coming, and we'll close it there.
Okay, I'm glad to.
Also, always be a gentleman in crowds in the water. You never get upset. You just grease in and catch waves, and everybody smiles. Besides that, you also are very good at designing your own boards and getting what you need for the right days. What would you tell the younger crowds today about how to be a little less aggressive in the water and have more fun, and also get back into thinking about the surfboards they actually ride?
Well, first of all, on the board design for the younger folks is listen to your mentors. You know, pick the board first that will allow you to learn how to surf. And then follow your own choices as far as, of course, going smaller. And listen to your mentors, whether it's their dad or brother, older brother, or some of the coaches we have now, Todd Holland, and John Holman and others, you know, any of us. I mean, a lot of you folks I surf with at the pier, we wound up coaching folks by accident, right? But I think the aggression part, and I went through a lot of the aggression part too in the 60s, and paddle battles for waves and all, especially everybody's on longboards. I would say save the aggression for the way you want to attack the wave once it's your wave, okay? But otherwise, keep it cool in the water. And if you keep it cool, and you keep cool-headed in the water, and you realize someone beat you to the wave that you wanted, or someone snaked you on the wave that they should have given you, let it go. Grab another one. Keep your head straight so that when you finally do get that wave, I don't care if you've been cheated out of 5 waves in a row, when you finally get that one good wave to yourself, you've let it go, and now you can enjoy the ride more and you can be aggressive in the way you want to attack the wave, whether it's just have that nice flowing skip fry glide, or you want to try to pop an air on the first turn, whatever. But leave it all in the water. Never, you know, if you have hard feelings with another surfer, you felt like somebody did you wrong, and maybe it's even someone who's a bit of a troublemaker, leave it in the water. Don't bring it up on the beach. Don't create a scene. Don't flip anybody off. Don't yell and curse at anybody. Let all that go, you know. And make sure that when you leave the water and you're through surfing that session, that you leave the water in a good mood, you know.
That's great advice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mentors who have influenced you in your surfing, your life, from when you first started up until now.
Gary Proper, Bruce Valuzzi, Claude Codgens, and Dick Catry. The real mentoring came from Dick Catry, and that's one of the things that's different now about the surf teams than what we experienced back in that day. When the Hobie team would load up to make a run up the coast, especially if we had to go to a contest maybe at Folly Beach, Isle of Palms off the Charleston area, we could make that drive overnight and be up to compete the next morning. We all met at the base of the pier. The Hobie team would meet there, and I still call him Coach Catry for a reason, because he would lecture us. He would say, this is what the waves will be like. I think this is who you're going to be competing against, and I want you to surf this way, and I want you to surf that way, and remember you're representing Hobie surfboards, and no one get in trouble, and be good citizens, and all that. And it was a real team with a coach, and so we had that level of mentoring that I don't see as much of today. You know, I see guys that might all be sponsored by the same major sponsor, but they all just kind of show up and it's a little more individual, you know. Pat O'Hare was a big influence. I just liked his style. I liked his flow in and out of the water, and I wanted to be a gentleman like he is. And Catry was a great surfer. Hard to believe this guy is at his age now would go out the pier and rip. I mean, he really was a good surfer. And so I got that mentoring from him, but there was also from Catry, because he was responsible for the Hobie dealership and promoting Hobie boards, there was the business side too, you know, we got from him. But mostly on the surfing, I'd go back to those guys, especially Gary Proper, who was just off the charts, you know. To go out and surf one session with Gary Proper, you're just trying to remember everything he did. We're all paddling out on a 6-7 foot day at the pier, screaming, paddling over the face of a wave, no leashes, old school longboards. Gary's in the middle of us. We're kind of looking at each other. Gary stops paddling up the top of the wave, spins around on top of his board, drops in fin first. Wave breaks. We look back, expecting to see him swimming after his board, and he's on the left, riding switchfoot down past Rosenberry's. You know, we're going, wow, I'm going to do that. Well, we'd try that on the next wave. We could, you know, the boards would hit us, the boards would wash in. But I always liked Gary in the water and the way he surfed, and I wanted to surf like that. And there you have it.
All right. Thanks so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
That's really,
Thank you, Dan.
Really good.
I'm honored.